Thank you for joining us to conclude this morning of this specific program of, for board members. Last year, we already had a session on the board, but this time we really invited the 100 international board members, and I hope that this session will be useful to you because they are the one who knows, and they will help us and guide us in this insight because, you know, when we ask those change makers, as we are in the room, we really want the change to happen fast and far. So we are wondering sometimes, why is it not moving fast enough? So this is the type of question that we have for you. So maybe, Monica, when we ask the question about why board really matters in regards to the transition, can you please share with us some tipping points, some insights that would enable us to really understand the shift that is happening?
So it matters because we entered a social environmental crisis which is existential to our economies and our society. We entered a period of total uncertainty. The only certainty we have is that we will have more instability. So our traditional recipe that is optimizing performance is not applicable anymore because performance optimization works in a very predictable environment. Therefore, we need to move to building resilience, building robustness. And in order to do, and the board is really, this is really the mission of the board, is the mission. So taking care, preserving the long-term value creation is the mission of the board. And the way the board works is not through action, is not an execution engine. It is a chamber to support and to challenge the management in order to execute. Therefore, by the nature of its own operation, the fact to analyze, ask questions, run scenarios, scan opportunities, think through, and Paul said, and Marie-Claire said the same. We need to give time, and I always think when I also chair my board, I think to Gilles Schnabe, who is the Siemens chairman, he says, before lunch, there is time for performance. After lunch is timing for strategy. And the only choice for a chair is to decide at what time is the lunch.
That's a good one. Maybe, Denis, can you share with us, you are a very active member also at Davos, for instance, and we were discussing when we were preparing the panel, is really the topic of sustainability at the core of the strategy a topic that is shared, that is common language at the board today, or have you seen something shifting in the last months or years?
It was, okay, we talked about Davos, so the issue about ESG was very much into the light line 3 to 4 years ago, with people wondering what to do. A couple of years ago, they moved to climate and focusing on climate, which has a plus and a minus. The minus is that you don't look at the whole thing. The plus is that you can actually start to focus and act upon it. And where it is important for the board is, as was said before, board have to look at the long term. And schematically, if you think that a CEO should spend 60% of your time on the short term, let's say 20 to 30% on the medium term, and 10 to 20% of the long term, the board should be the opposite. The board should spend 60% of its time on the long term, 20 to 30 on the mid-term, and 10 to 20 on the short term.
And what is
that
the
means
reality?
That lunch would be at 11 o'clock in the morning.
And what is your reaction to what Guillaume just said, which is the data shows that the board is spending only 20% on what is coming next?
No, it said that 20% of the people realize that there are some issues that are coming. However, together with Chapter 0 and other elements, we measure each year the impact on French companies. And the latest studies showed that 80% of French companies now have a specific committee that looks at ESG. When 80% of the board have a committee looking at that, it means that it's as important as strategy, nomination, and audit. So that gives us a lot of hope in the future.
I think it was 25% 5 years ago, right?
Exactly. By 2015, it was only 25%, and it rose from 25% to 80%. That means that now ESG is a centerpiece of the governance of companies.
But there was a question about, is this a good or not, a good sign or not? Because the reality is that you go for sustainability strategy, or there was a discussion this morning about should it be the strategy committee? How do you manage that? And what's your perspective on this? Would you recommend this to any board?
Yeah, I think that the structure of the board has to be decided by the board, so there is not a plain solution. I think it's accountability should be clear. There is a piece which is a strategy, which is a piece which is reporting and disclosure. There is a piece which is really financial correlation. So I think there is room, and then there is a piece for remuneration and indexing remuneration on long-term KPIs like climate. By the way, Denis was referring to a joint study with Chapter Zero France and Ethics and Board, and of course IFA, on the indexing of the remuneration on climate change. Mm-hmm. So more than 50% of
executive
120 company in France index on a quantitative KPI on remuneration.
But I heard that this was 6% of the total revenue of the executive. And the second question is that, the second point is that the actual results on those objectives were 120.
This is very true. So you say two very true things. So first of all, the weight. Is there a weight which is the ideal one? The study shows that there are by sectors. Energy sector has a 20% weight, in other sectors it is less. So again, I don't think that there is a solution fitting for all. Of course, more the weight, more if you succeed, and over-succeed, you pay. So you need to be attention on the weight you put. And in terms of overachievement, the study shows that, yeah, there is a level of overachievement, but we can have a chat on that.
So a question that as many changemakers is asking us is, what is holding the board back? And we had this session this morning, and maybe you can elaborate also on your experience as the chairman of IFA, but also what you've heard this morning.
First of all, the board should not be held back. You know, if you look at the missions of the board, one is to approve the strategy, and a change is a strategy. The second is to choose the CEO that will be able to deliver that strategy and look at his or her package. And that as well are elements that go directly to the board. And once the CEO will come with major decision as, should I invest in transformation of my factory? Should I get some supplies from nearshore or offshore? Those kind of strategic decisions are taken at the board. So I was rightly said before, the board cannot hide. It has to face reality. What is holding today the board? I think there are a couple of elements. I will not go with what was said before. Some of the people say, we don't know, and therefore we don't address it. I think this is not correct. The first one is diversity. When we look at it, we talk about diversity not only on gender, but also on skills and experience. France was one of the first countries to impose a 40% gender diversity. And what we've seen with that is that it had multiple amazing effects on two fronts. First of all, the average age went down. The average age of board of large companies today in France is 56 years old. You heard Paul was saying 63. The second was that the diversity of people on the board as well changed. 20 years ago, most of the board were made with former CFO or CEOs of company, and today, French board have much more diversity in terms of skills coming from digital, kind of HR, marketing, and also on age. France is the country with the most, where you can find people under 40 that are boards of young companies. So just by having one law, which was work on gender, helped on multiple different areas. So this is the first thing. The second thing is being trained. one is not born a board member. It's like being a baker, a plumber, or a banker. A lot of executives that we see at IFA come to us and say, I was the head of this company, the head of business unit of that. I have the head of marketing or HR, and I want to become a board member. No. Get trained about what you're going to do. You became the head of marketing because you got trained, and after you learned about that tool.
Why is it so different? Maybe you can elaborate, because I'm not sure that everybody in the room understands the difference between being an executive of a business unit or whatever, and the role of board exactly.
Because you counsel people. And this is where, I heard people say, oh, we would need to have a lot of young people on boards. I'm not sure this is actually what we need. If we want to have the voice of young people, then we can have a lot of studies that give us that, right? And that should be brought up by the CEO or other people. We need some experience. So board are here to bring experience. But you can have experience when you're 35 and 40.
What's your opinion on this one, Monica?
Yeah, we were discussing about this with Denis before. And I was saying, Karine, allow me this. The first time I read in 2010 the IFA Vademecum, I couldn't understand a word because it was too theoretical. Without having gone through experience in the boardroom, I was not able to figure out how does it work. So I'm thinking that I take myself as the average young at that time person. You have an executive experience and you are used to get things done. And by the way, some of my experience taught me that the least the board understand on the problems, the better it is. So this was my mindset. So you need to practice a bit and then learn. But Denis had a fantastic idea on the Vademecum. This will be a scoop, a future.
Tell us more.
Okay, let's use technology. So at IFA, which gathers about 4,000 board members in France, we publish every couple of years a Bible on what a good board should do, good board members do. But Monica was telling me, rightly, Denis, it is for people who know what it is all about. So I've just sent a WhatsApp to the CEO of IFA here and say, we're going to put the whole thing on ChatGPT, and we're going to summarize it in 5 pages. And for next year, we'll be able to share it here.
This is a scoop, and thank you, Karine.
But the point goes back to training. The point goes back to be an effective board member, you need to know what you're doing. And my advice to everybody here in the room that say, I want to help a company, I want to become a board member because I have a lot to share. First of all, you have a lot to listen to, because you have to respect the CEO where she wants to bring the company to, and you have to help her be successful. So first of all, listen, understand how the world is going, ensure that you know what value you're going to bring to the board, and get trained on what it is to be. If this is the case, then you're going to be more courageous in your decision. Paul was saying, we need courageous leaders. Yes, this is what we fight for. We fight for board members that are courageous and that take risk in a board. I remember 5 years ago, I was a chairman of a board, and it was a very, very difficult situation. And I was underlined with many shareholders. And I went on the board and I told my wife, I guess I'm going to be fired today at the board. But I think it is important that I stand for the values that I carry. I was elected to be the chairman. I'm going to stand for it. And it was like the movie 12 Angry Men. One by one, as we were talking about the topic, which was how much money we could give back to shareholders, then they understood a different way. At the end of the day, they voted in favor of keeping most of the money in the company, and I wasn't fired. But I was free. I was free to be able to defend... Independent, to be able to defend what I believed in the values. So in order to do that, you need to know what you're talking about, you need to be trained, and you need to have the energy and the confidence that you can be an active board members. And this is what we're trying to do at IFA, but in other countries, there are also other organizations that can help you.
Thank you. And because we are here in the world's largest event of changemakers, Monica, what gives you hope in the ability of the board to drive this transition? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is the fact that through the 30 chapter zeros in the world, Chapter Zero France is one of 30 chapters within the Climate Governance Initiative, grouping 100,000 board members around the world on climate and governance, and of course biodiversity as a twin crisis as climate. We are all embarked on an initiative that is intended to make us better, to make us better board member, to learn, to exchange, and the type of dialogue that we are having in our conversation here in France, but also in the other chapters that are Chatham House conversation on very, very specific technical topic as well, the level of the quality of exchange is extreme. So I see people with appetite. I see people, of course, I see the engaged people. I don't see the climate skeptic ones. But they want to understand, they want to exchange. And we said before courage. Hélène Leteneau, who is a good friend of mine, she says, you can be brave, you can be courageous without being born courageous. Because when you understand the challenge, when you see other people having succeeded, and when you want to be part of a movement, your acts can be courageous.
Thank you. And maybe one last word, Denis. What gives you hope in this journey of the board moving into the transition?
First of all, I'm a born optimist. But I think that today what we see is a good balance between hard law and soft law, all of them pushing in the same direction. The soft law is, all peer pressure, events like today, and training that we can give, and diversity. All those help people be able to make better decisions. And after, you have the hard law. France passed a new regulation last year, which forces companies to have 30% of its executive as female by gender diverse, let's call it that way, it's for female, by 2026, and 40% by 2030. That is a hard law. Mm-hmm. Europe just passed a law on CSRD, how to report it. All those laws go in the same direction to entice companies that don't want to move to actually go with it. However, what we don't do enough, and that was shared earlier, we don't talk a lot about companies that do very well. And I think we should also, in the way we do talk about, celebrate the company like Kering that was here, or L'Oréal, that are really pushing forward. And what I'm happy with is that even as a financial investor, you can see that their stock price has increased substantially since they took that decision.
There is a case. There is a case here. So I want to thank you so much for your insights.